everybody, and welcome to episode 104. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and this is the Best Games Period podcast. My wonderful co-host, Naomi Lugo.
Hello, everyone. I'll bring my energy in, I promise.
We're super excited to be here, and we are going to be talking about Ms. Pac-Man this week. This is the big Pac-Man episode. The Ms. Pac-Man episode.
Make the sound effects. Go.
Waka 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 waka. Bloop,
Yeah.
bloop, bloop.
And we're done with the show.
That was it. That was all you got.
That was the debate, and you won it. So
I think that's all anyone ever wanted from a Pac-Man episode. So I think we've covered all of the bases. We just stole home plate. It's over.
Done.
So for whatever reason, over 100 episodes in, I still forget that I should give like a brief description of what the show is. So if you're new to the show, if this happens to be the first episode you're listening to, thank you. You're probably someone with really great taste. We appreciate you.
And patience for getting this far into the show.
Yeah, especially getting past the waka 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 waka. But this show, we every week we pick one game that we're going to talk about, and we discuss whether or not it's one of the best games of all time, if it belongs in video game canon, if we want to be pretentious about it. And this week, we decided we'd go kind of all the way back. It's been a while since we did a super retro game. And what better game to do than one of the Pac-Mans? It was kind of a toss-up between which one we were going to do. And I think we'll get into why I think Ms. Pac-Man is. I don't know if Naomi has strong opinions about Pac-Man or
I
Ms.
don't.
Pac-Man.
I'm the bouncing board. Woo!
Okay.
I'm going to be the devil's advocate, and I can't wait.
You're the ghost, and I'm the power pellet.
Which ghost, though? Which one?
Blinky.
All right, that's fair.
Maybe Pinky.
Pinky or Blinky? I mean, Blinky's the blue one, right?
I think Blinky's the orange one.
Oh, okay.
Maybe. Yeah.
Now, yeah.
That probably profoundly affected our relationship there. But
orange, huh? Okay, fine.
All right. But before we get into all of that, let's talk. How are you doing? Let's talk a little bit about what's going on. What are you playing? What are you not playing? What are your thoughts, feelings, aspirations, goals?
All right,
plans?
So we're gonna do a therapy session. Sounds good. All right.
Yep.
It all began when I was born in Hawaii.
Okay.
Yeah. And then this week. So this week, I've only been able to really play my mobile phone games. Pokemon games, of course. Pokemon Go, which has been giving me some sort of issues. Like, my GPS won't turn on sometimes it will. So I missed Squirtle Community Day, and I didn't get my Squirtle squad with the glasses, which is okay, I guess, since the glasses aren't like the proper ones from the episode anyway. They're, the Squirtle squad and not the main rad Squirtle glasses.
Oh, not like the round ones?
They are the round ones. They're not the pointy ones like Ash's
cool
Squirtle.
Ones. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Which is still canon, I guess, but they're not what we all wanted. Let's be real. So I've just been leveling up. I think Pokemon Go Fest is this weekend, which I will not be attending. I will be watching from afar to see if this one is a success or not. Hopefully, is this the second year?
I'm honestly shocked that they're having another one.
Yeah, I mean, last year obviously was a debacle, but they can make money and people are going to spend that money and crash the website within 5 minutes. I mean, of course they're going to do it. So we'll see. Fingers crossed that it will be a good experience for the fans there. But then I've also been playing Pokemon Quest, which is adorable. And I recommend
the block
it for
one, right?
Yeah, and I really want the block plushies cuz come on, those are so cute. And like just a little detail in the game, you have a base camp, and if you go to your base camp, your Pokemon will just be kind of hanging out with each other, and sometimes they'll like jump on each other's backs and like stack up and like twirl around, and it's the cutest damn thing ever. So yeah, it keeps me there. But other than that, I've been watching some Dragon Ball Z,
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Are you an long time fan of the show?
Actually, I've never watched the show like completely. I've only ever watched chunks of it. So now I'm finally going back and watching the full thing. Well, I mean, obviously I'll have to go back and watch Dragon Ball, but we started at Dragon Ball Z, which is fine. And yeah, so I only have like 1 million episodes to go until I catch up.
I recommend once you finish once you get through like the Frieza arc, go back and watch Dragon Ball Z Abridged on YouTube.
Okay.
Have you seen any of those?
Maybe. I don't think so.
Maybe. It's one of my favorite things, and I'm not particularly a fan of Dragon Ball Z, but Dragon Ball Z Abridged is brilliant, and I love it. And it's basically a bunch of these voice actors getting together and redubbing the show and recutting it down into like 10-minute long increments instead of like
wonderful
full episodes. It's great, and they like redo the entire scripts, and they inject a lot of humor into it. And it's one of, as far as I'm aware, it's one of the oldest. Not one of the oldest, but it's a pretty old YouTube channel. Like they've been doing it for like I think maybe 8 years.
Oh my goodness.
Something like that. And they're still doing it. They're still working on episodes now. It just takes them really long because, you know, they've grown their business and all that stuff, but it's really great. I highly recommend it.
For real, every anime should have something like that. I'm looking at you, Naruto. My goodness. But yeah, we've been watching it, and oh my gosh, I have to resist the urge to like pause and like make memes every 5 minutes. I made like 2 memes today. There was one where Goku just like was prancing around in a flower field, and then he was underwater happy, and then he bounced. Yeah, it was great. So the art is just amazing, and Goku is just the biggest dork, and yeah.
Oh, he really is. It is wonderful.
Such a dork. I know, he's so pure-hearted and great, but a ripped monster. Oh, and one more thing before we go on a Dragon Ball tangent, but I love how they are able to objectify men in that show. I love it. Like just bursting pecs, like booty, full on booty, and even like just full frontal nudity. Just Yep. Dragon Ball does not give a F. They are here with their animation.
True that.
But yeah, what are you playing?
So just last night I finished Vampire, the vampire game that just came out of Don't Nod, the people who make Life is Strange, which we've been talking about them for like a long time, or at least I have, because we just did the Life is Strange episode not that long ago, and then I did a solo episode thing on the awesome adventures of Captain Spirit, and yes, and then I played Vampire, and nice. Vampire is I'm writing my review of it right now, so all of my thoughts aren't really fleshed out. But the gist of my opinions on it are that it is a very ambitious game that tries a lot of new things that I haven't really seen games do before, and I really appreciate that kind of studio and that kind of studio philosophy that emphasizes taking risks like that. I mean, like, who else? I can't remember the last like big budget vampire game that came out. Like, the one everyone goes to is like Vampire the Masquerade, and that came out early 2000s. I guess there was Blood Rain, but we haven't seen one of those games in forever. And then what else is there? Maybe a few anime spin-offs of things.
Yeah. But not really anything too mainstream.
Yeah, and so it was interesting to see like a modern interpretation of like this early 1900s London that is in the grip of the Spanish flu, and you play as this doctor who is turned into a vampire.
And he's so proper.
And he's honestly he's
a dapper gent.
He's a dapper gent, and I really like his character arc, especially because it has to take into account a lot of the things that the player does. And there are definitely some flaws. Like, you make some major decisions throughout the game, and some of them don't come up ever again, and I don't understand why they were important. and like another thing that irks me is that some of the most interesting stuff that happens in the game happens in the last 20 minutes of it, and it's a relatively lengthy game. And I wish it had spaced some of those reveals out a little bit better so that the middle didn't kind of sag. But so just structure-wise, it's a little uneven. There are some other problems. Probably my biggest like mechanical complaint about the game is that the world traversal is awful. Like you can't fast travel between areas of town, so you have to run through the streets of London all the way through all these other areas, and it's just not really laid out super great. And it's hard to find where you're going. And so sometimes you'll just end up wandering, and that's just not fun.
I hate doing that.
Well, especially because you're a vampire who has the power to teleport.
Yeah.
And you can only do a weird like shadowy dodge during combat. But you can't like teleport to a ledge that you can otherwise see just fine if people spot you. You have to fight them and kill them, and then you can jump away. Which, like, one of the major appeals of being a vampire is that it's, you're very mobile. You can turn into, like, you can fly away. Like, that's a big thing about, being a vampire, and that mobility is just not present in the game enough. Like, I would have loved to just be able to teleport to rooftops, run across roofs to get where I want to go. That would have been great. But that's not an option. And I don't want to fault the game for things it doesn't have. It just gets really tedious and irritating to have to run across the city all the time. Especially when you know that you're a super powerful vampire. It just does not add up. But overall, I really, really liked the game. I thought it had some really cool stuff, especially at the end. And it's very, very pretty. And it does some interesting things. So if you're looking for it, pick it up. I give it a thumbs up. Not 2 thumbs up, but a thumbs up. And it sets up a lot of really interesting things that could be used in sequels. So, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. My final thought is that it's kind of like if the Order 1886 or whatever, I think that's what it was called. If that game had had a slightly lower budget, had been an RPG, and was more interesting. So,
that's a lot of ifs.
Yeah, it's a lot of addendums. But if you've played that game before, maybe you understand. So, with that, I haven't really been playing anything else. Really, I'm just about to get started on Kingdom Hearts, which might be a hint about things to come. Hint,
giant
hint.
Giant hint.
And I've just been trying to keep my head in the video game industry to keep informed of like things that are going on, but also one ear out because I can only take so much malarkey at one time.
Only from Twitter can we get the word malarkey used in a conversation. That is a very accurate description of what happens in the game industry via Twitter. Yeah.
Do we want to talk about it? Do we want to just move on to Pac-Man?
We can just briefly talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so as you might have seen, dear listener, there was some controversy over the firing of one of the Guild Wars 2. I think she was a writer, right? She was a writer.
Yeah, she was part of their narrative design team.
Okay, that's the actual word I was looking for. Narrative designer. Because she was slightly rude to a fan on Twitter. And so there's a big debate happening, I guess. It shouldn't even be a debate, really. There's a big discussion happening about everything pretty much that is branching off of that. So that's the relationships that fans think they can get from developers. Like if they're there for their personal, they're not personal customer service lines, especially on their personal Twitter accounts off the clock. Should a company support their staff? I mean, I think yes, but there's discussions around that. How it was handled by her employer, ArenaNet. And if this is going to have overarching implications for how female developers and females in the game industry, going forward. So I think it's a mess. I really do.
Yeah. Well,
I was trying to be nice and objective, but it's a mess.
It's surprising how many different issues, something that seems to be it would be a small deal in the overall scheme of things, that this touches on so many different aspects of so many other issues that it has quickly become a much larger conversation about a much larger variety of things than just one specific incident. And kind of when you start digging into it, because on the surface it seems very simple, but I think once you start digging into it, there's a lot of complexities and nuances and shades of gray in the situation that make it really hard to parse out for a lot of people. And one aspect of it is that women in the video game industry, women in general, have come up with a term called mansplaining, where a man will come up to a woman and assume that they are less competent and explain something that they likely already know. And this is a thing that happens quite often in life in general to women, but especially in the video game industry, where there are still a lot of prevailing ideas about men and women that haven't really adjusted to the modern day.
AKA, you're a female gamer? You don't see too many of those. Oh, do you actually play video games? Which ones? Let me tell you if those are good enough video games for you to be a gamer, etc.
Yeah, and those sound like things you've heard yourself.
Oh, maybe.
And you actually write about video games for a living, so you are uniquely more qualified than most people to talk about video games.
And I'm working an event with a company, and I think I know about video games. If one, I am a games journalist, and then two, I am representing a company that is involved in video games. Come on, people. Anyway, back to the issue at hand. From what I've seen, ArenaNet kind of touted itself as one of these places that supported women and marginalized people. Actually, there's a quote I have here from the developer that was fired. Her name is Jessica Price. This is a quote from a Polygon article, and she said, "The fact that it was a company that touts itself as a welcoming to marginalized talent that may have reignited a hate campaign designed to drive that marginalized talent out of games is very painful irony." And I really hate that Gamergate is coming up again just because it's so damn volatile, but she's absolutely right. It kind of stoked the fire because there's a lot of backlash now from organized hatred groups on Reddit saying, hey, we have this power to drive out people who don't agree with us, especially on Twitter. Let's get these people fired. And there have been many developers and other people in the industry who have posted these forums and messages that they've gotten from these people who are trying to harass women out of their jobs. And it's pretty ridiculous. And even one of Jessica Price's coworkers was fired because he came in to defend her. And his remarks on Twitter were even less inflammatory than Price's, which is just... man, it's a mess.
Yeah, he basically stepped in to say that she wasn't soliciting this kind of interaction, and people should lay off of her, and he was fired for that.
And he didn't even curse. I mean,
no.
not to say that what Price said should gotten her fired, but it's ridiculous.
Well, so to kind of maybe flesh out the specific incident a little bit more, Jessica Price took to Twitter and was basically describing her writing process and the difficulties that she has encountered writing MMOs, because MMOs, as you might know if you play video games, are a notoriously difficult genre in which to tell a story, especially one that involves characters and like actually being invested in narrative events and stuff like that. And so she was kind of talking through how she approaches the various challenges that come up when you're writing for an MMO. And I forget the name of the person who approached her on Twitter, but after she had finished this thread, this streamer who is partnered with the Guild Wars 2 community basically was like, I disagree with you slightly, and here's why, and then went into an explanation of what branching narrative is, i.e., making choices to navigate through a conversation in a game. And here's the thing about Jessica Price. She's been writing video games for over a decade. And she knows what branching narrative is. Like, it's a very common video game writing technique. She is aware that it exists and aware of its pros and cons.
This is the mansplaining, by the way.
And I think what's really difficult for a lot of people to understand is that this is still, even if you frame that as politely as humanly possible, the base assumption that it is being communicated under is that she is incompetent and doesn't know about this very basic writing tool in her profession. It would be like sitting down with J.K. Rowling and suggesting that Draco Malfoy's character arc throughout the entirety of the Harry Potter franchise might have been given more impact if she had used this technique called foreshadowing. Like that.
Yep,
like
that's
J.K. Rowling knows what foreshadowing is, and that person might frame that to her as politely as possible, but it is still a grating and irritating thing, and women are faced with this all the time. It's not like this was a one-off thing. And so when she encountered that on Twitter, and she's not in the PR department of the company, she's not really under any obligation to be civil to people who approach her and she feels are being jerks. And so in this case, she felt like this person was being a jerk and acted in kind and basically, did the Twitter equivalent of rolling her eyes, and then later indirectly called this person an asshat.
Which is in the realm of names to call people is not that high, which I know is not the point, but still.
In the realm of Twitter, it's probably a pretty good day if just one person calls you an asshat.
Yeah, and Jessica Price has been extremely vocal on her Twitter. Definitely beyond the time that I've followed her, so it's not out of place at all. And what I've been reading is that the company ArenaNet was actually encouraging them to be able to use their voices on Twitter. So that's another part of it that just makes it extra confusing. And from what Price has said, she's never had any problems with the company before. Like, she hasn't had any, reprimands or anything from her Twitter usage. So,
well, and the other part is I read that in her interview when the company hired her, she basically said, this is how I am on social media. I'm loud and I say what's on my mind and, speak out against things that I think are bad and speak up for things that I think are good. And ArenaNet said, yeah, we support people who speak truth to power. Now, granted, that is not carte blanche to just say whatever you want. And it's, I don't want this to be misconstrued as saying, game developers can just be dicks on Twitter and social media. And it's I think it's very much a good point to say that she was rude to this person. And they were also rude to her by approaching her with that assumption. But the fact that it then, like, that just should have been where it ended. A slightly unpleasant exchange that was kind of rude, but then it got picked up and it became a huge deal. in the Guild Wars 2 community.
And the company fired her because of that reaction. Not because of what she did, but because of that reaction.
Yeah, and not only that, she was fired directly by the head of the company. The president of ArenaNet fired her in person. And there was no reprimand. There was no taking her aside and saying, hey, maybe don't act this way on social media when it comes to people who have bought our game. Nothing like that. And so the difficult part about this is that ArenaNet is 100% legally within their rights to do something like this. They are legally, they can fire anyone practically for any reason.
Yeah, it just shows that it gave support to that Reddit community that wanted to get rid of women. And then that in turn just has a domino effect where a bunch of people who don't like women in the industry or just want to spew a little bit of hatred, they are more empowered now because of ArenaNet's actions.
Yeah, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be women, but any kind of group that is perceived as
anyone they want out,
vulnerable.
They can spew this hatred towards. That's what it kind of opened the gates to. So
yeah, and they have. I think it's also important to note that they didn't just fire her; they went out of their way in their statement on the firing to literally paint her out as an enemy of the community, which has in turn fueled even more harassment against their ex-employee, which I think speaks to a level of vindictiveness that is kind of shocking.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to say that, she was rude and so she was fired, but it's like another thing to go the extra step to make sure that her life is worse after having lost her job at a company that she worked at for a very long time. Not only that, but in the discourse around all of this, I see very little mention of her counterpart who was fired.
Yeah. He's a perfect parallel right there.
Whose name is Peter...
Fries?
Yes. I wanted to say that, but also fries didn't sound right, and I was thinking it might just be because I'm hungry. But the weird part about all of this is that a lot of the arguments that someone might say about Jessica Price being fired don't seem to have any bearing on Peter being fired too. Like, he didn't say anything that was objectionable. He basically just stood up for his fellow employee who... I would hope that if I worked at a company for years that some of my fellow employees might stand up for me if there was like a big outcry for something that seemed minor. But he got fired for almost no reason. And there hasn't really been a good explanation that I've seen anywhere about why. And from everything I've read, there hasn't really been any reason given. And so it's just very strange. And I admit I might have missed some things because I've had to be focusing on other things for the last week or so.
And it's super complicated. As you said before, there's so many different elements in this. So if you feel like it, definitely do some research on it. And I mean, just keep your eyes on Twitter because I'm sure it's going to come up again. It's not gone.
And I just feel the need to impress upon people that if you're not working in the social media sphere, I don't think that, like, let me start that thought over. If you're a game developer, or if you're really any kind of person on social media, I don't think that you have any obligation to be polite or civil to anyone unless you work specifically in PR. I think people should act polite and civil, but I don't think you should have any kind of it should not be a fireable offense if you are a jerk to someone.
Rude, not offensive, mind you, not like
not
saying
obscene.
Horrible, not obscene, but just saying like, hey, Jack, you're profile picture is round. Whoa.
Oh, how could you?
Which might be rude, but I'm not being like, I'm not saying obscene things. But yeah, it just brings up the debate again, like, are our social media platforms really a space where we can be totally free? And of course not, but there's just so many different nuances there.
Well, and it's just, it seems to me that people should be able to be themselves on social media, and within reason. If you're not advocating, like, hatred against groups of people,
which Twitter is still seemingly fine with, but that's another debate.
Yeah. I mean, you have Hideki Kamiya over in one corner basically calling the people who follow him and displease him cockroaches and threatening lifelong bans and, like, just throwing all kinds of shade. And you have this woman call someone an asshat one time. Indirectly. And basically say your comments towards me were sexist, because mansplaining by its nature, no matter how politely you frame it, is still sexist. That is an offense worthy of firing. That's worthy of taking your livelihood away from you. And that doesn't seem right to me unless you are specifically in PR. I think,
and even then, I think there's, and before we go on this subject forever, I think there is a division between that too. Like, one of my jobs is in social media. I manage social media accounts, but that doesn't mean I am obligated to act as that voice on my own platforms, So I think there is division unless you are specifically mandated by your employer in a written contract, that your voice on any of your platforms will affect that. So, I mean, it's complicated because we haven't really waded in these waters too long, so there's always going to be new issues that pop up.
Yeah, and another thing that just is kind of like disturbing is, like, a lot of people went through old tweets to dig up dirt, and that has become like a recurring thing on social media. I'm not, like, she said some things about Total Biscuit's passing, which were, I think, unacceptable, even though I'm not particularly a huge fan of Total Biscuit. Celebrating someone in the community's death is probably not ever an okay thing to do. And maybe this is just going off topic, but I think living in an age where anyone can dig up dirt on anyone else is just so dystopian and kind of scary. Because you can manufacture outrage about anything now.
Yep.
So
yeah. Deep breaths.
Any final words? I might just cut this section out and put it as its own thing.
Maybe.
Because we have been talking about it for like 30 minutes.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay.
I can't really think of a nice way to just, like, round it out either.
Yeah, I think my closing thought is that sometimes there are things that seem like they are very, very simple, and they are that simple, but only if you don't think about it. And I think one of the things that I really want this show to be about is just encouraging people to, like, spend some time thinking about stuff. Even the stuff that seems really simple, because often the simple things are actually way more complicated than they might appear. And I think that in this case, that's a big factor in everything that has been happening in the discourse, because viewed in isolation, this one interaction seems very innocuous, and it seems like a huge overreaction on the part of the developer towards this person who seemed very polite. But that's only one piece of a much larger picture that includes hundreds and hundreds of moments like this where she either didn't respond or, responded and wasn't snappy, and this one time she snapped, and now she lost her job, and so did someone else. And that second thing doesn't make any sense no matter what context you view it in, really, to my mind. But yeah, just seek out more context in things, and yeah. Anyway.
And yeah.
Ms. Pac-Man!
Woo! Alright, why is it the best game? Period. Why is it a best game, period, Jack?
I mean, if we really want to get down to brass tacks about Ms. Pac-Man, I think you have to acknowledge that, A, it's basically Pac-Man, but better in every possible way.
With a bow.
I mean, yeah, it's, did someone famous sing that jingle?
Oh God, probably.
About Pac-Man in a bow. But she's not just Pac-Man in a bow. She's Ms. Pac-Man. And I guess there was a lot of debate over naming the game, which it was only officially set in stone that Ms. Pac-Man was going to be called Ms. Pac-Man, like literally hours away from the game going into production. It was originally called Crazy Otto, and then it got they were going to call it Mrs. Pac-Man, but then someone was like, that might not fly, so we should just call her Ms. Pac-Man. And that kind of gave her a little bit of a little bit of like in-character freedom and like a little bit of a bad girl edge, I guess.
Because being single and not married is so bad.
But here's the thing. She was single and not married, and she had a kid with Pac-Man.
What?
Yep. There's a cutscene where they have a baby together.
Unacceptable. Yeah. Oh man.
Which is, I think, why there's like a wedding scene in Ms. Pac-Man. Anyway, there's like an actual storyline to Ms. Pac-Man, but it doesn't matter. It's basically just meeting Pac-Man, falling in love, and having a kid. So Pac-Man. I think this, in order for this to be like an actual episode, we need to talk about Pac-Man in general first.
Okay.
Because Ms. Pac-Man is basically just Pac-Man, but better in every conceivable way. So what's the basic premise of Pac-Man? In
game, yes, but I don't know if I want to really dive into her character design now or later. It's ridiculous. I'll just dive into it now. To make something female, you just put a bow on it and some lipstick and some blue eyeshadow and those legs. Oh my God, they're disturbing.
How else would you do Ms. Pac-Man? Like in the 1980s, where it's hard to differentiate characters.
Here's the thing: I would be okay if the Ms. Pac-Man sprite just had a bow. Like, that's fine. I'm totally fine with that. But I'm talking about like the character art, where she's like strewn across like the letters.
Yeah, she's weirdly sexualized,
like super sexy. Like, come on, she's a freaking pizza with a slice missing, and you're gonna sexualize that? It's gross.
Have you met men?
Yes, I have met men, and that makes it even more gross because I'm sure if you were to look up Ms. Pac-Man on like the dark web, yeah, you'd find some really disturbing things, and I know the dark web is like that sounded dorky. Anyway, I really, really, really hate what they did with her character design. Not in-game. In-game is fine. Whatever. You can't... There's not too many details there. But it is just so gross and just...
I was not expecting this.
I really just don't like... I mean, it was the 80s, right? So it's really bad. Her makeup is terrible. But it just brings me back to how they have engendered other video game characters. Like one of Bowser's children... I can't remember her name. Yes. She just has a bow, and she's pink, right? And then they go further and make her annoying, right? And just like little things like that. She's the female because she's pink and has a bow, but then she has these seemingly feminine character traits that are just totally degrading. And I'm so glad we've moved past that era.
Have we?
I say that hopefully. I mean, we have a reboot of Lara Croft where she's actually, got circular boobs versus pointed triangles. So we've made some progress.
Hey, those are to give her aerodynamic abilities, okay?
Yeah, she like runs forward, plane. Right? Yeah, because, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, that's my only gripe with actual Pac-Man, or Miss Pac-Man. At least for now. Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, I mean, speaking of things that seem very simple on the surface, I think there could be some people who heard what you said and are just like, that was a weird gripe, but I totally get it, because it's already super weird that we gender colors anyway. Like, there's nothing inherently feminine about the color pink. We have just collectively decided that mostly because of marketing in like the 60s, the 50s and 60s. Pink was not always a feminine color. And blue was not always a masculine color. And it's just like a weird societal quirk that we have arbitrarily decided that is the case. And you see that then filter into things like video game character design and
absolutely everything you can imagine. Like, pink toothbrushes, pink shoe, like pink is just everywhere. And I personally love the color pink, but I hate that pink is just the go-to for female. Like, pink is a great color. Everyone should be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, you're right. 100% right. And it's just there was a really weird period in early video games where art on the side of arcade machines meant a whole lot. Like, the having some titillating art on an arcade machine could mean the difference between like or put it just ignore a video game arcade machine, a commercial or a poster or a VHS cover, whatever that might be, was the thing that sold the game. And it had to have like exaggerated features, and you had like to make it more interesting or titillating. And it's not like it's just that's where you get like that classic I think it was an Atari ad of like the woman going, and he hasn't touched me in ages, and she's wearing like a silk negligee or something, and her husband's on the couch playing an Atari. It's weirdly using sex to sell, but to kids.
To just enforce the very negative, very negative things that came out of that era. Like, women shouldn't be playing video games. That's not for them, and women only have this purpose of being in the bedroom, all that crap. To children. Come on.
And it's also super interesting because it was really starting in the 80s that marketing decided that video games were for boys and not for girls. And prior to that, video games were for everyone. But marketing styles of the time dictated that in order to have an easier time selling to people, you split them up by demographics. And so that's why we then had people... It perpetuated this shift in culture where computers specifically were marketed to men instead of women. And you can actually point to that as the reason that today the tech industry is filled with mostly men instead of women. Because there was an entire generation of people who grew up believing that computers just weren't for girls. Which is crazy. That's a crazy thing to think. But that was like the big idea, and that in turn kind of rolled over into video game advertising as well. And one thing that I think is really interesting about Pac-Man is that it actually, despite your gripes against Ms. Pac-Man in the character design, specifically in like the splash art department, Pac-Man in particular and Ms. Pac-Man, they came out very close to each other in like 1981 and 82, but they specifically were designed to buck the trend of video games being only for boys. So, and what I mean by that exactly is that, so Pac-Man was designed by Toru Iwatani, who basically was like, he was hired by Namco, right? And did not want to design video games. Like, that's not what he wanted to do with his life. And he was put in charge of making a video game. Because it was the 80s, so why... Okay, let's just throw everyone at video games, right? And so he set out, and he's like, I want to make a game that has no combat. I want to make something that appeals specifically to women, because I'm going to these arcades in Japan, and there aren't any women in here, and that's pretty weird. And and he wanted to make it about eating. So, very relatable desires, I think, all around.
Women and eating. More women and eating. Yeah.
And so, like, to make it visually appealing, like, it was using a wide variety of colors, using a very simple and kind of, like, endearing character to kind of rally people around, being Pac-Man, and then having like this maze-like control scheme and maze-like layout and a simple control scheme and easily understood goals. That just really clicked with a lot of people, and it actually hit the target demographic. And so Pac-Man was a huge hit for women, and it brought in, a ton of women to arcades all around the world, which is part of the reason why it is one of the most successful arcade games of all time. And so when they made the sequel, they decided that they were going to call it Ms. Pac-Man, and it would be a female character. And Ms. Pac-Man is actually the first playable female character in any video game ever.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Boy.
So, in a way, it's a tribute to women.
She's a feminist icon.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. But also, obviously they could have done better. But for the 80s, it was like a touching tribute and like a big milestone for video games. And I think, I don't know, I just think, we should maybe take it as an artifact of the times, perhaps.
Yes. Lest we go insane. So you kind of touched on something about it not having combat, and I kind of wanted to get your opinion on whether you think this game is non-violent or not. Because, of course, you're going around and eating these cookies, right, as Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man, but you also have the opportunity to consume these ghosts. So would you consider the game non-violent?
I would, but I also don't know exactly what the ghosts are, because until it came out on the Atari, the creatures in the game weren't actually called ghosts, and they weren't like described at all. And the only reason we actually know that they're ghosts, or that the game described them as ghosts, was because
weren't they originally monsters when they released in Japan?
Well, like, they had the same design, but when it came out on the Atari, the character models for the ghosts were flickered, and they would disappear, because the Atari port was just absolutely terrible. And so, in the manual, in order to kind of cover their own butt a little bit and explain the behavior of the game, they wrote that they were ghosts, and that's why they disappear.
Okay.
Not because of shoddy workmanship or technical limitations. But, I mean, are the Ghostbusters murderers, Naomi?
Well, they're definitely not non-violent.
I mean, but are they violent towards... Can you be violent towards a ghost?
I think so.
Because they aren't dead. They just keep coming back.
Yeah, but I think you can be violent towards them without killing them. You can be violent towards a lot of things without killing it.
That's a very vaguely threatening statement.
No threats implied. I mean, it's tough because, of course, we don't have a lot of story or anything really to go off of. You're Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man eating and then occasionally eating fruit and occasionally eating ghosts who are hunting you. But I would say that this game, I wouldn't say it is violent, but I would say that it has violence in it.
Would you say that this is the first example of a survival game? Because you need to eat to survive.
And... Well, you don't need to eat. You can win a level without eating any ghosts or
but you're eating cherries, the little pellets.
Yeah, which is like, why does he need so many cookies? What's happening? Is he just like a cookie fiend? And what's happening? That was another gripe I had with the game. Why? Is he just like, did he drop them on the floor and now he needs to eat them up and then all of a sudden the house is haunted? What's happening?
I mean, I think we're getting what's happening is we're getting a window into an alternate reality where these are just the rules. Where you have to
keep on eating?
Well, I mean, because his name basically translates to like the Japanese word of like to eat.
Yes.
Some kind of variation of that. And I didn't realize that like Pac-Man was originally like they had a K in there.
Pac-Man.
Yeah.
And marketing again ruined everything, and they changed it to Pac because they didn't want people to draw an F in there.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's probably pretty smart.
Yeah, that was probably good marketing decision. It was definitely
gonna happening. It probably still did happen.
Thumbs up, marketing department.
Once. You get one thumbs up.
But yeah, I mean, this was also one of the very first games that had like a character in it, like as opposed to a ship or like just a dude with a sword or a gun or something. Because I mean, before this, you had Pong, Space Invaders, Asteroids. I mean, there were other games around that time too, but like this had Pac-Man, and it was like you were playing as Pac-Man, and that was the character. And I think that is part of the reason why Pac-Man then took off and just became this huge commercial sensation in terms of like merchandising. I found out that they actually have a Pac-Man board game made by...
Oh yeah, there's Pac-Man everything.
But like it's like a unique Pac-Man board game. I've never seen it before, never heard of it. I saw one quick image of it as part of like a video I was watching as part of the research for this episode, and it looked like the craziest thing I've ever seen. It was like hungry hippos, like, but moving around a board. It was very strange.
That sounds awesome.
And there's also the apocryphal story that like I don't think this is true. I think this is wishful thinking from Toru Iwatani to kind of like, I wish this had happened, but there are also some places that say that this is what happened. So, you know, you decide what you want to believe. But the story goes that he took a team of his out to get some pizza, and back then a team of game developers was 8 people, and they got a piece of pizza, and he took the first slice, and then he looked down, and there was Pac-Man. Which
I've heard that story too.
I don't think it's true. I don't think that happened.
I don't think so either.
But that's still great.
Oh man. But I did have a quick theory, I guess.
Okay.
For lack of better words. So other games have to do with violence, right? And later on we get a bunch of different genres. So Pac-Man could be a way of tackling one of the 7 deadly sins, right? We get gluttony, where other games get wrath or pride. And later on we'll get vanity and all that stuff. So that's one of my theories is why this game exists and why Pac-Man might be a little evil. So, he's the embodiment of gluttony, going around eating as much as he can before the afterlife tries to take him on.
But does that mean that if you beat Pac-Man that you've ascended to a different plane of existence?
No. There is no end. There is no beginning.
But there is an end. Billy Mitchell is the first person.
I mean, technically, yes. Technically, yes. There is an end, but there wasn't supposed to be an end.
But does that mean that he broke the 7 deadly? Does that mean Billy Mitchell broke the 7 deadly sins?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. It was just a quick thing because I'm like, really, why? What is the point here? And
the artistic point.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think
to me it is gluttony.
I think one of the interesting things about early video games is that there is a lot that's left open to interpretation because at the end of the day, these things are works of art, but they never were intended to be interpreted necessarily in an adult way. They were intended as like a fun game for kids, but I think then there's a lot of things like the classic example of Missile Command representing like Cold War, possible Armageddon. That's really interesting, but I don't think that just because other games weren't necessarily designed to have messages, they can't have them.
I think everything has those hidden Freudian things to them because we are taking from our experiences and creating anything. So everything is going to have a little bit of our experiences in it. So I think it's impossible for art to escape any of that.
Oh yeah, and
external meaning.
I mean, especially because then the person who interacts with it after it has been made is bringing their own set of experiences and worldviews to that, and the meaning is some kind of interaction between that thing that someone else made and isn't necessarily around to interpret for you, and what you're bringing to the table yourself. And so we're always going to be able to extract meaning from these things. And the interesting thing about Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man is that everything is so abstract, except for very certain concrete aspects of the game, that you can read a whole lot of different meanings into it. And I find that very interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing I discovered, and this is something that more and more I've been noticing as I read up on a lot of older games. There are so many influences from Popeye the Sailor in video games, it's ridiculous. Like, Shigeru Miyamoto got the idea for absorbing a mushroom power-up and getting bigger from Popeye cartoons. Toru Iwatani got the idea for the power pellets that you eat in the corners, giving you, like, superpower. That came from Popeye. And also, they're not called power pellets, which is something I found out. The term power pellet came from the Hanna-Barbera cartoon that came out in the early 80s shortly after Pac-Man became super popular, and they're actually called energizers.
Okay. Yeah. Energizers. And before that, they were cookies. I'm not just pulling that word out of my, that was a term that was used when the game first came out, by the way.
Also, I mentioned Shigeru Miyamoto. Pac-Man is Shigeru Miyamoto's favorite video game character of all time.
Oh, man. Of course it is.
He's on the record as saying that. Now, to be fair, Ms. Pac-Man is not his favorite video game character of all time. So...
Miyamoto doesn't like her. I don't like her. I'm kidding. I'm kidding, guys.
Just another like fun fact I learned while researching this. Namco was actually making 2 games at the same time as they were making Pac-Man, like the original Pac-Man. And there was a game called Rally X, which, had you ever heard of Rally X before?
It sounds familiar, but
okay.
That's probably just because of the X in it. X seems to be a video game letter.
was this racing game, and it's from everything I saw, it looked all right, but internally at Namco, it was considered like the vastly superior game to Pac-Man, and like it would they even had game conventions back in the 1980s, and every convention that they went to, Rally X outperformed Pac-Man every single time, and was awarded like awards at the shows. But when it finally released, no one, like almost no one, remembers Rally X, and everyone remembers Pac-Man.
Shows that we know nothing.
Right?
We can know nothing.
I only know that I know nothing.
What a surprisingly nihilist episode.
Yeah. So we've kind of been dancing around it, but Pac-Man blew up to be one of the biggest the first video game sensation. Like after the establishment of arcades, owed almost entirely to the popularity of Pong and Space Invaders. Pac-Man was like something that truly transcended all other video game popularity up until that point, which is like it got huge. Like it was billions of dollars worth of money in Pac-Man, which is kind of crazy to consider. That's 1980s money. And I had a number here I just wanted to throw out, and I'm trying to find it in my notes real quick. But, yeah, in 1981 alone, just in the United States, over 20 billion quarters were put into Pac-Man machines.
Oh, man.
20
I can't even
billion.
fathom 20 billion quarters.
I think I read a study once that the human mind can only like accurately visualize like maybe a couple thousand things at one time.
I can't even do that. My top's probably a couple hundred.
Yeah, I mean, like you're like, what does a million look like of something compared to 1,000 of something? And then you like we can't really even grasp a million, and then there's a billion.
Yeah, that's outside of my realm.
But in Japan, this game was so popular that for only the second time in history, Japan had to print more coins into currency.
Jeez.
Yeah. So this was like, it's hard to like overstate how big Pac-Man was, and I think that just in terms of like a cultural phenomenon, Ms. Pac-Man might not have been like, it was part of the Pac-Man phenomenon, but it wasn't like causing it itself. However, Ms. Pac-Man did outsell Pac-Man by quite a bit. Yes.
Is it time for Contrarian Corner?
No, I wanted to go into the history of Ms. Pac-Man just a little bit, because I mentioned it was called Crazy Otto.
All right, let's do that then.
Okay. So this is like the weirdest part of Ms. Pac-Man's origins, is that it started off as a game called Crazy Otto that was designed by General Computer Corporation, and they were like this tiny company in the United States, and their entire thing was that they made add-ons to existing games to make them into different games, which, as you might imagine, wasn't super popular with the companies that they were making add-ons for, because they were unlicensed. And so you would have games on the Atari getting these add-ons that another company was selling, and Atari had not authorized to be made. And Atari ended up taking them to court, where they won their court case. It was because they had been making like an add-on to Missile Command or something like that. Well, they had this company, this tiny company, General Computer Corporation, had also been working on an add-on for Pac-Man, and that add-on was called Crazy Otto. And they were like, well, we can't actually sell this as an add-on anymore, so we don't want to just let it sit here. And so they actually took it to Midway, which was the American distributor of Pac-Man. And they're like, hey, Midway, we've got this thing that's basically like Pac-Man, but better. And, you know, do you want to do something with it? And Midway looked at it and was like, yeah, we do. We'll buy it from you. So they bought Crazy Otto from this General Computer Corporation. And they workshopped it and decided that they were going to make it into a sequel to Pac-Man. And that sequel, they eventually decided would star a female character called Ms. Pac-Man. And then they started distributing it. Well, the problem with that is that Midway doesn't own the rights to Pac-Man. They are just the distributor of Pac-Man in the United States. So they were essentially going behind Namco's back to put out Ms. Pac-Man. And it was totally not authorized. And so Namco got super upset at Midway, and they had like a big fight about it. And they ended up settling, and I believe that the first edition of Ms. Pac-Man that got put out was from Midway, but Namco retained all future rights to Ms. Pac-Man. And so that's how that's essentially like today a modern a modern company today that makes games, like maybe a tiny startup is like, hey Microsoft, we made this a sequel to Minecraft. Do you want to buy it from us? And Microsoft going, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And then they publish it as Minecraft 2. That's crazy. Anyway, I'm done.
Okay. I mean, I was trying to think of something to add there, but yep. History. All right. Now is it time for Contrarian Corner?
Contrarian Corner.
Woo woo. So, Contrarian Corner is going to look a little different this week, just because there's so many Pac-Man games, Ms. Pac-Man games. So, I actually found an opinion piece from Game Informer by the writer Cyril Vasquez, and he says that Pac-Man has always been the bad guy. So we'll see what he has to say in a couple quotes from the article. So, one part says, as I devoured my upteenth ghost train, one of the little sucker's eyes caught my attention. They may have just been several dots put together with a mouth or a visible reaction, but nonetheless evoked an empathy I had never felt before. And I realized this time, Pac-Man has been the bad guy, and we have all been complicit in his Pac-mania. Alright, and I'm scrolling to another part that kind of drives home. Alright, so, in Championship Edition 2, ghosts don't even harm Pac-Man. The first time he bumps into them, Pac-Man has to bother them repeatedly for them to be a threat. Then he eats a trail of ghosts. The game revels in his murder by panning the camera upward as he ascends a spiral of ghost death. The game's giant boss ghosts are a final attempt to get Pac-Man to stop eating so many damn ghosts, but to deal with them, Pac-Man summons his own army of Pac-Men to devour them. The scene of a crew of Pac-Men devouring a sea of helpless ghosts is altogether too much. So yeah, Pac-Man's evil and mean to ghosts.
Are they helpless ghosts if they all murder him on contact?
That is a debate to be had, isn't it?
Also, here's my artsy-fartsy interpretation.
All right, let's go.
Maybe Pac-Man is just rampant, unrestrained capitalism.
Ooh, that is very artsy.
It just consumes and will crush anything that stands in its path that doesn't possess like a chilling effect on it. And at the end of the day, if it goes too far, it crashes. It hits record high profits, and then it crashes.
Also, capitalism could be interpreted as gluttony, right?
It could be.
Unbridled capitalism. Here we are getting artsy with our Pac-Man interpretations, as it should be.
Okay, so Naomi, you hate Ms. Pac-Man.
I don't hate her. I just don't like the way they chose to design her. As a character, she's fine, but as the way, yeah, you know what I'm saying. I'm trying to villainize me. So my main gripes with Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man I can't really connect with what's happening on screen, which I know kind of sounds silly for an older game like this, but at the same time, a game like Galaga or Space Invaders even, I have a dangerous mission and I can transport myself into the spaceship where I'm desperately trying to flee or shoot down these aliens that are trying to kill me, right? With Pac-Man, I just don't get that same sense and that drama. Usually when I die in Pac-Man, I'm just mad.
It's like a giant puzzle.
Yeah, maze, puzzle, same thing, right? But at the same time, this game is so ubiquitous that I remember it being in every pizza parlor I ever went into, at least when I was a kiddo. And that would be some of the reasons why I would go pick up the pizza with the adults, is so I could play Pac-Man for a little bit while they waited. So it's hard to avoid Pac-Man, and yes, even Ms. Pac-Man's relationship to the gaming industry and how much it propelled it. So that's where I'm kind of stuck. I'd say yes, it's one of the best games period for history, but personally, no. If I can sit in the middle there.
Okay. I think that as far as arcade games go, Ms. Pac-Man is like the number one arcade game ever. You eventually get to other ones like Street Fighter 2 was huge in arcades, Mortal Kombat. We got other just legendary titans of the arcade industry. But I don't think we'll ever see anything ever again like Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man. Like with Pac-Man, and then Ms. Pac-Man after it, which outsold Pac-Man, you had people who were literally like converting their entire stores into Pac-Man places. Like, there are multiple stories about grocery stores that cleared out all of their inventory and just set up Pac-Man machines and rolled in the money. Like, people were nuts about this game. And I think that it's pretty easy to see why. The setup is simple and it's fun. It's very easy to understand. You're right, it is very abstract in that there's not a whole lot of context for what's going on. Ms. Pac-Man does add a little bit to that, but not a whole lot. And I think that what you see as maybe a weakness in the modern day was at the very least seen as a strength when it came out, because you already had so many games that were very solidly dramatized by acts of violence, whereas Pac-Man is mostly about avoiding conflict. I mean, sure, you can occasionally turn the tables with the power pellet, but at the end of the day, you're mostly trying to avoid your enemies and maybe work out their patterns so you can get around their patrol routes. I think at one point, what's his name? Metal Gear Solid Man.
Hideo Kojima?
Yeah, at one point Hideo Kojima pointed at Pac-Man as kind of being the inspiration for a lot of the stealth mechanics he ended up putting in the original Metal Gear Solid, with the maze-like patrol routes of people, and then like the mechanic of avoidance being super important, and no one had ever really done anything like that, and so I just think that that's really interesting. You can actually kind of see like the roots of horror games in Pac-Man.
Yes, because it's purgatory.
Well, because you have to, like, you don't have power. Like, your natural state is not having power against these creatures that are instant death to you, and so you have to run away from them. And that's a very, I guess, primal thing about Pac-Man.
Primal.
I mean, it's kind of weird to think about Pac-Man tapping into like our primal subconscious, but I think you can see it if you sit a kid down in front of Pac-Man and get them to play it. Like, they kind of freak out and start laughing when you get a little bit too close to the ghost, and the ghost sees you and like speeds up a little bit to chase you.
Yeah.
And
I do respect that little detail there.
I find it to be a fascinating game that was kind of ahead of its time, and you can trace the evolution from Pac-Man into so many different things. And Ms. Pac-Man is just the perfect version of Pac-Man. So, with it does so many little things that make Pac-Man overall better. There are more map layouts, more the bonus fruits move around the level as opposed to just staying still in the center. I just think there's so much to love about Ms. Pac-Man and Pac-Man in general. So, yeah, it's a solid yes for me. There's no question about it.
No wishy-washiness like me. All right. Well, as always, we'll probably have to depend on you, fair listeners, to deliver the final verdict, won't we? If we remember to get that poll up.
If we remember to put that poll up.
Which we will do this week, right? We will do this.
Yes. You're the one who does it, though.
Yeah, I'm the one who always forgets, so you all can be mad at me.
Also, we'll be putting up our new logo soon. Pretty excited about that.
I didn't mean to sound like ghostly there. I guess ghosts are just on my mind.
Yeah, I wonder why. Ooh. And with that, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Libsyn, pretty much all across all of those podcasting apps. You can probably find us. Best Games, period. Or The Best Games, period. You can also find us on Extra Life, community.extra-life.org, where you can also read about a bunch of other cool video game things that are all coming up in the near future. It's pretty excellent. We just put up some stuff about Tropico 6 and Fear of the Wolves and a game called The Spectrum Retreat. And you should check all those out and our podcast. If you really want to support us, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/bestgamesperiod, where you can throw us $1 per month, and that helps us keep the lights on, and might garner you some super secret extra episodes. So get on that. Also, I mentioned Extra Life. What's that? It's basically a wonderful charity where people play video games and raise money for sick and injured kids in hospitals all across the United States and Canada. It's very excellent. It's part of Children's Miracle Network Hospitals, which is a very reputable nonprofit. I recommend everyone check it out over at extra-life.org. And one of the cool things is when you sign up, you can actually choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital you want to support, and then 100% of everything you raise goes directly to that hospital to help sick and injured kids. So if you play games, this should be a slam dunk for you. You play some games, get some money from friends and family, and donate it to a good cause. And, yeah. Anything you want to add, Naomi?
No, just that when we get our new logo up, we might do a little bit of celebrating to usher in that new look. We might be giving away some games, doing some cool stuff like that, so stay tuned.
And with that, we'll be seeing you on the Flippity Dippity.